Hi everyone, my name is Kristen Anton. I'm the New Tactics Online Community Builder, and this Google Hangout is meant to complement our New Tactics online discussion on working safely and effectively with documentation tools. We're hosting this online discussion and these Hangouts in partnership with Heradox and Benetech, and this is part of our larger conversation series on seeking justice. So today we're going to be talking about effective and safe collaborative documentation and information sharing for human rights practitioners. And this Hangout will be broadcast live, and it's also going to be recorded. I'll post the recording of this discussion in our New Tactics online discussion forum. So now I'm going to ask each of you to introduce yourselves briefly. I will start with Molly Land. Molly, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Molly Land. I'm a professor at the University of Connecticut School of Law and the Human Rights Institute at the university's main campus. I work broadly on issues of technology and human rights. I'm a human rights lawyer who's interested in new technologies.
Great, thanks. Dimitri, could you please introduce yourself? You're muted.
Yes, hi, sorry. My name is Dimitri. I run an organization called Equality. We develop digital security solutions for human rights organizations and independent media. Some of the solutions include human rights documentation tools. Thank you.
Great, thanks. And Janvier, could you please introduce yourself?
Hi, I'm Janvier. I'm a protection associate at Eastern Horn of Africa Human Rights Defenders Project based in Kampala. I'm also a student at Makerere University, PhD level, and I co-lecture digital security and digital documentation, especially matters because it's my specialization. I got a chance to be trained by Colin from Benetech, and now I'm an expert. And last month I was in Bamako. In February and May I was in Bamako as a consultant in matters under Freedom House, training the human rights defenders from Mali. And I customized matters for the Mali context, for only to cover 5 regions.
Great, thank you. Friedhelm, can you please introduce yourself?
Hi, my name is Friedhelm. I work with an organization called Heradox, and we also develop documentation tools, OpenFSys and Casebox, and work with human rights groups around the world in developing and designing documentation projects.
Excellent. And Francis, can you please introduce yourself?
Morning, everyone. My name is Francis. I am an intern with Kristen this summer, and I am also a student at Clark University in a master's program for international development and social change.
Thanks. And Francis will be writing the summary of this discussion to post on our website, so huge help. And Enrique, could you please introduce yourself?
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Enrique Piraces. I work as the Vice President for the Human Rights Program at Benetech. We work around secure information management and data collection, providing free and open source software, like many of my colleagues here. It's a pleasure to be here.
Glad you're here. All right, thanks everybody. So we've had on our New Tactics site and in these Google Hangouts some really interesting discussions around why security is important to human rights documentation, that we're trying to protect vulnerable populations from whom the information is being collected. We've talked about when and where documentation happens now, and that it's a very diverse and complex group of people and organizations and different professions that are now collecting human rights information. A big question that has come up in these Hangouts and also in a few places on the New Tactics site is, what do we do with these people who are collecting sensitive human rights information, but they are not necessarily aware of the principles and the standards and the processes that are already being discussed and being developed for human rights practitioners? How can we either bring them into the fold, or how can we train them on some of these pieces, or what kinds of tools can be developed to help them know how to do this right? So I encourage you to if you have any thoughts on that, please go ahead and raise that today during this Hangout, and also bring those thoughts onto the New Tactics website where we're talking about these questions as well. And yesterday we talked a lot about the tools that are available for human rights documentation, and what questions you need to ask yourself to identify the right tool and the right approach. So we talked about tool development and how the development of these tools needs to really be based on the actual needs of practitioners on the ground and not just what we think that they need. We talked about how there are different purposes for documentation, and that it's very important to know your goals for your documentation project, the goals of your organization. It's also very important to understand the risks and the threats and to assess those things before moving forward with a particular process and a tool. And then we mentioned some of the tools that have been developed specifically for human rights documentation. And the tools that we've identified so far are MARTIS, OpenFSys. We know that CaseBox is in the pipeline for HeroDocs, and we're ready to explore that. Also Corroborator and RightsCase. So those are some of the tools that have been developed specifically for human rights groups, but then we also talked about other tools that are being used and adapted by human rights groups. So there are content management systems like Drupal and WordPress that are being used. There are constituent relationship management systems like CVCRM and Salesforce. There's also mapping tools like Ushahidi. Lots of people just use spreadsheets. There are lots of mobile phone applications that groups are using, like Text Secure and WhatsApp. And then there's just paper. So also when we talk about criteria for selecting the tool, it's important to know what kind of information you want to collect and what your goals are and what your needs are and what your capacity is. And that was a good point that Friedhelm raised yesterday. Another point that was raised yesterday is the importance of including open data standards to make sure that migration and the use of data is a bit easier for human rights groups. And this is something that should be considered as for those of you who are developing these tools. So today we're talking about effective and safe collaborative documentation and information sharing. And we know that some of these tools that we've already mentioned do that, and some of them probably do it better than others. And so I'd like to start out by just asking you all, what are some of the challenges and barriers to human rights practitioners in collaborative documentation and information sharing, and why do they want to do this? So if anybody would like to start that, please feel free.
Okay, so why would documentalists or human rights group want to do this? It's just the nature of their work. Seldom people are on their own. There's seldom these single activists that are just doing something, and people are usually collaborating in a very fast pace to use advocacy opportunities, to make their voice heard, or to provide specific interventions very fast for a single case. So they need to exchange information to get the work done, ideally as fast and as simple as possible. And some of the human rights tools allow them to do this, but the question is that where they're actually doing it, or are they using other tools around this, especially if it's in a really fast-paced environment that might not always be secure. One of the examples that came up yesterday was heavy mobile usage, and a lot of people often use WhatsApp. I mean, you can talk about the insecurity of mobiles more generally, but that's obviously a particular example where people are just using the tool because they need to do something very fast, and they're not using the tools that someone else has designed or would want them to use, but they use what they know and what helps them to do things fast. That is why I think as a community of tools developers and intermediaries, we need to look at this and need to sort of do some soul searching and figure out how we can either implement this into existing, implement our tools and work into existing workflows, or can provide alternatives that people would actually want to use, because there's benefit in there for them, apart from something that we think is benefit, but something that they feel really helps them in doing the work.
Great, thank you. Enrique, Molly, Dimitri, Jean-Pierre, thoughts?
Well, exactly. I mean, very often the point of collecting human rights documentations is to enable some sort of legal action or perhaps litigation. And very often you cannot get, these groups don't have these kind of opportunities in the local country, so they apply to international or regional bodies and mechanisms. Hence, you know, it is absolutely essential, as Frida mentioned, for these processes to be able to either share the raw data itself or the analysis of this data with these bodies. And sometimes, I guess as the topic of this meeting suggests, this has to be done in a way which is extremely confidential and in a way that doesn't leak information to an unauthorized party.
Okay, so one thing that I would like to add is that I think that if we think of effective and secure human rights documentation, one of the things is that this reflects something that is related to the nature of human rights work in terms of the capacity of organizations as well as the pressure for things to happen in certain timelines. And what I have in mind is that on the one end, human rights documentarians will try to find the most effective tool that they could rely on for their work. This is one of the reasons, for example, that they rely so much on things like Excel or Google spreadsheets. It's a very simple, easy way to put data. It's very easy to share, it's very low cost, and speaks to the practices that they have already in other areas of their life, right? And when you try to take a look at the tools that are available that provide security, they start to become incredibly cumbersome. Every one of the tools that today allow some level of complexity around information management on top of encryption is incredibly hard to use. So we have somewhere here in the middle of this conversation, the concept of usability, right? Right now, I would argue that one of the big battles that needs to be fought for those, for example, for those of us that provide technology, either directly or indirectly, is to make sure that usability is that glue that allows to put, the effective next to the secure. Otherwise, documentarians will need to keep using, the tools that they are available to them. And to the point of that, it's going to be really hard for us to try to bring them out of effectiveness into security, because that actually may be more damaging to their mandate than the exposure of data. And again, I know that this is a conversation that is difficult for and is different for every context. So this is a gross generalization. So I think this is the point where we start to. So I have been very vocal about the ethical responsibility of those that collect data, right? Like if you deal with the data from vulnerable populations, you have to encrypt your data. But I think that in this conversation, this is the moment where we can put that ethical responsibility on tool developers, right? You have the ethical responsibility to provide tools that are that are jointly effective and secure. Like excessive focus on one of them is, and again, I'm going to oversimplify this. I don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, including mine. I mean, it's not ethical, right? Like you need to provide a solution that is able to push this together. Let me make a pause there.
Good points.
Yes, one of the challenges that I met is that when you are using the secure documentation software, people are not really aware that those software exist, and also like they prefer to use common tools like Excel or Word because you got some trainings since secondary school and at university, and you find that such trainings are even in the curriculum of the university. So that's why also the commonality of the tools forces them to use use those traditional, what I can call traditional documentation tools, which are not secure. Another item is usability. Some of the tools are not really user-friendly and they are difficult, and even the available materials for self-teaching are not really user-friendly. Like, for example, I was reading the training manual of Benitech, and it is really academic. It's not really illustrated. And I raised such an issue when Benitech trainer Colin was training us in Kampala. I say, what if we develop a kind of like illustrated primer for matters, so that even non-computer scientists could really teach themselves, or you can train some and they become trainers of others. And one of the philosophy of Benitech is to reduce the dependence syndrome. And from that end, now I have a draft of training matters, how to use matters, illustrated. I've tried to make some screenshots and from one menu to another, but now I'm going to see how I will analyze each menu and the sub-menu and analyzing the probable questions and the difficulties that trainees may understand. And also, I've also developed the curriculum of training matters. Now, my colleagues who would like to go train, they know how to proceed, and it is available. But it is in French now because I was a consultant, so it was just in French. And also, I'm working on the primer on how to customize matters. It's not easy, but it takes time. It's really a huge project, and combining with my studies and also work and everything. So it is. But if it is illustrated and shows clearly, when you click here, you get this picture. If you don't get this picture or this illustration, you are wrong. Just go back. And also, you give some difficulties that many of the trainees always meet, and any self-teaching will be really great. And I think also we can push. I think I discussed with my supervisor, and we are about to implore the Senate of Makerere University to allow to introduce digital documentation in the curriculum. It's not easy, but once more people use such software, they become more common, and it becomes easier for people, and even we have more trainers. Thank you.
Thanks. Molly, please.
I just wanted to add a question. This is fascinating. I mean, I've heard 3 different types of barriers to uptake of these tools. One is how easy they are to use, and I have to attest to that myself. I'm fairly confident with technology tools, but I needed Enrique's step-by-step guidance to install, was it Jitsi? And anyway, to get some secure chat going. The second is an awareness that the tools are out there, and the third is familiarity with the tools and the ability to use them. And I just wanted to add a question, which is, is there a need for information, sort of an empirical understanding of what organizations, how broad is the uptake of secure tools? What organizations are doing a good job of this? Is it does it tend to be organizations in high resource, large organizations? Are they doing a better job? Should we focus more on the small organizations that are operating in low resource contexts? And then do we need more information about how best to increase uptake? For example, are organizations more likely to take up these tools if they're introduced to them personally? Or is it as Jean-Pierre was just saying, is it a matter of making the materials more accessible? So broadly, do people on this chat feel like we need more information about uptake and what can influence it?
Enrique, did you want to go ahead and respond to that?
So I think, well, I don't know if it's a response could be brought out of me right now. I think that overall, like every time that I hear usability, every time that I hear some of these things, I end up thinking, very biased that there's an uphill battle that needs to be fought. I go back to my current dogmas, but right now I'm fixated in something that actually Janvier just said, which starts to remind me of the bigger picture here, and is that I think that we need to start to train our the current and especially future human rights practitioners early in their career, so usability becomes less of a challenge because there's less of a gap to fill. So I know that this is not an appropriate response, but this is kind of like what I got fixed when I heard the last two comments. And I recently heard something that made me feel very optimistic, and this is a little bit of oversharing, but I'm pretty sure that only a few million people will watch this, so it's not that bad. But our friends at New York University School of Law have a global global justice clinic, and I just heard that they have already been including what I think Janvier referred as digital documentation in their curriculum. And one of the very interesting things is that they also have included encryption on their own, right? And in thinking of what we have been discussing, so again, I'm very optimistic that this may mean that for the users of the future, like 2 or 3 years from now, those people that will become the program officers, the program associates, whatever they are, the distance between their knowledge of technology and what they need to do in order to use things like Casebox, Martus, Corroborator, etc., will be way smaller. So actually, it's possible to think that even without any of us modifying the tools, it may be possible that the usability barrier is less, just because the actors are more empowered, because they are more aware of the tools. So again, it's a terrible response to Molly, but that's what I had in mind.
Yeah, I'd like to come in as well, just to add a footnote, I guess, to what Jean-Pierre and Enrique have been saying. I mean, I've been dealing with the questions of usability over a decade now, as we're teaching digital security and as we're teaching human rights documentation tools. I think on one side of this argument, you cannot get away from raising the capacity and the awareness of the users themselves. I don't think security is implied in any tool, and security has to be taught as a conscious process. On the other hand, there has been a lot more efforts, at least in these funded projects that we have been running on usability, so on UX and on the design of the tools. We spent quite a considerable amount of time on Corroborator, and actually attracted specialists in the field of information layout and what's called UX, information design. We didn't claim that we knew the picture anymore, because we understand that the field of design and usability, is its own field, and we're conscious enough now to attract specialist help for this purpose. So it is getting better, but again, I don't think you can get away from educating the user at some level.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think I would agree with Dimitri on that point, that it's not about only building the right tools and getting the tools closer to the users, but sort of having both sides come closer together, or looking for tactics that don't need to introduce a change, which can be totally appropriate for a documentation project, but won't be in every case. So it can be a matter of baking in security considerations into what people are already using. Say, people are using email, but they think twice before they put names in their reports, or they think twice before they attach a picture somewhere. And then there would be someone, say in a centralized location, who would compile all the information into a tool, who would be in a better position to spend the time and dedication to work on this, rather than trying to get it to someone else. but it's obviously something that will work in every case. And to Molly's question, and to what extent academia can maybe help us understand the picture of what is going on, it's very interesting, because I think in terms of empirical research, how the uptake is, and how this actually played out, and which organizations are more likely to take on such practices, I don't think there is much. There has been recently, earlier this year, a piece by Tactical Tech where they interviewed some security trainers, where they're reflecting around the whole question of what should security trainings entail. But that was again practitioners interviewing practitioners, which is a very valuable piece, but it wasn't as grounded as I would expect an academics piece to be in theory. So it'd be very interesting to explore that further, yeah.
All right, I'm going to ask Carolina to jump in here, and I would, seeing as how you're using these tools on the ground right now, I'd be curious to know what some of the barriers and challenges are for you and your colleagues around collaborative documentation and information sharing, and where you think the gaps are. Like, are you guys using things that maybe you shouldn't be using, but it's just more easy and convenient?
Okay, good morning for all. I want to share two things, and are probably two topics very different. One is how we share the information about this archive with other people. First, like we have a law, in Spanish is decreto. It's like officially we have the obligation to share information. Okay, and second one, for make researchers, we use Martis with HRDAC especially, and the other kind is moving all the information in disks for going on other countries. This is the first step. Other form we share information is making the job. Probably Enrique can explain better with appropriate words, but we with HRDAC use something like LaTeX, for example. This is probably, it's not documentation properly, but we are talking about the metadata. We use the dashboard, and I will explain why I am mentioning this. And we are using the SVN. This is important because it's not only shared sensitive information or not, it's only about the documentation. It's about the process, the entire process. That criteria we use for take decisions, especially because we work together every day and making things. And when we talk about the give information for the other researchers or the other institution, we use the access law that say we have the obligation to share everything. And for the last part, it's here in Guatemala exist different institutions working about the conflict, looking disappearance people, for example. And for right now, they are working to create a new law for create the best way to share information, because some Enrique talked in other moments, the ethical things. And here in Guatemala exists another kind of stuff. It's the idea that the information is mine. So for that conflict, we are talking about to create a new database collecting information, sharing the same fields. So something like everyone can share information about the names and data and dates and places to disappearance, something like that. And not to share everything, because that is a big ethical question here in Guatemala, for example. What kind of information I can share with other institutions that we are working in the same topic. In this case, is disappearance, and that is not almost finished. They are talking about how to do that database, but that is the way they found for not share everything about everyone. I don't know if I answered your question.
Interesting.
I answered your question?
Well, it sounds like you all are, yeah, I think so. Does anybody want to comment on that?
So, I mean, not particularly. I mean, I think that it would be interesting to kind of like find a way to get out of this conversation some high-level kind of like perhaps recommendations either for the conversation that we should have through the rest of the day or for this group to kind of like pursue. My sense is that one thing that is becoming, I guess, less documented is the how and why the potential human rights documentarians are sharing information. I think that we are all kind of like aware of the very big picture sharing. You know, like I collect documentation for research. I collect documentation for advocacy. But at a lower level, my sense that is that human rights documentarians are, and again, I'm thinking of this from a security perspective, human rights documentarians are sharing information daily or frequently for other reasons. You know, some of them because they move between devices. Some of them because, you know, they may rely on consultants. Some of them because they may be a consultant. Some of them because they work in 7 things at the same time. Some of them because they don't know what they're doing. So, but my sense is that it would be interesting to find a way to understand, you know, how the information and why the information is being shared. And once that is kind of like a device, it would be interested to think about the type of people that information is shared with, as well as the type of information that is shared in terms of like information types. And I'm saying that last bit because I think that one thing that happens with sharing, given today, given the way that general technology works today, is that a lot of metadata is created, right? Every transaction, encrypted or not, will create at least a minimal amount of metadata, right? There's an opportunity there as well as a challenge or risk, right? So I think that it will be nice to find a way to pursue, you know, those 2 or 3 things that need clarification for the effective and security or unsecure components of this conversation to be clarified.
Yeah, that sounds like a good plan. It's already 36 minutes after the hour. I can't believe it. And we didn't even get to really talk about how some of your tools are being used for collaborative documentation and information sharing. Do you guys want to keep talking, or should we just wrap this hangout up and discuss the rest on the forum?
We can continue if I still have time, so just we can. Yeah, I can.
Okay.
I don't know whether it's okay for everybody, or I don't.
Well, if you guys still had time, it would be really interesting to hear from Enrique, Friedhelm, and Dimitri about how your tools allow for collaborative documentation and where they're at with that.
Okay, if you guys don't mind, I would like to go first because then I have to go to a meeting. So I'll be brief, and I will make an invitation to everyone to potentially discuss this later, either privately or publicly. But I would like to bring the example of the work that we're pursuing in Africa around the support to LGBTI communities. This is particularly interesting for us because we think that the LGBTI movement in Africa is nascent. It's about to gain strength from an institutional perspective, and it's getting great support internationally. So I think that there will be very soon a platform for advocacy and change that will be equivalent to that of certain traditional human rights movements in other regions. And one of the things that has been critical for this is the ability to do two things. And again, this is, like many other things that I have said, a gross simplification of things. But on the one end, there's the ability for us to work with a distributed network that has a common interest, and in a way, do something that, at least from our end, looks like a collaborative piece of work. Working with multiple actors across borders that have a general shared interest around the documentation of a topic. On the other end, each one of the partners that we're working on each one of these countries that will remain unnamed for the moment it's about national or networks. Like, many of them are working in a scenario where the only way that they can push their issues forward is via consent shared. The sharing of information over consent or informed consent. And we are starting to see great developments around it. Like, sharing of information seems to be critical for increasing the pace of advocacy. It seems, and again, this is my very biased perspective, given that we are in a way the provider there. Of course, it will be very interesting to hear what these groups are saying from this work, of course. But my perspective is that the sharing of information has been critical for the pace that they have been able to achieve. They're moving really fast for what you could expect from a human rights network of organizations. They have done great work in less than 2 years. And I would argue that this is highly related, not just to Martus, which is the tool that they're using, of course, but to the understanding that the information that they're collecting not only needs to be preserved, it needs to be distributed and shared for particular reasons. So they collected information using what we consider a strong methodology, and they're making or taking actions rapidly on top of that. And in many cases, that is either sharing to a peer or pushing this forward to a national, regional, or international expert for a potential feedback or evidence sharing.
Enrique, can I just ask, when these groups do share this information to a regional, national, international expert or institution, how do they share that information? Is it already analyzed and it's in that kind of form and not the raw data?
I think it's going to depending on the mandate, and in particular depending on the level of trust with that other peer. Some organizations will share aggregated information, just very vague about a potential incident. Others will have already networks of trust with their counterparts, and they will exchange the raw information. Some of them actually do what we are trying to advocate for, and they will actually do this over a secure channel already. So they will actually ask their counterpart to become a Martus user for them to securely share this more sensitive information. I have to say that, of course, it's not the majority. There is a challenge around usability at the moment, but it has been something that is very exciting because it came from the groups that we're trying to support. It didn't came as the software builder pressuring to use one use case rather than other. And we're trying to learn from that experience to see how is that we, instead of focusing on the use cases that we have defined on our end, we can actually document this one and alter our software to better provide a support for the sharing of information, which is about to come, by the way, because Martus 5.0, shameless plug here, guys. I should have like a little banner. Cha-chan! Martus 5.0, which is what is going to come at the end of the summer, is taking a lot from kind of this experience in terms of improving. It's going to be a shift in the paradigm. And I have to say that we also have taken a look at Corroborator, Casebox, and other tools, given that I think that there are, and at least Casebox, which is what I know the most compared to the other tools, is ahead of the game in terms of usability. Good job, guys.
Friedhelm, do you want to talk about Casebox and OpenMSys?
Sure. Yeah, thanks. I think we're before but Enrique has to leave. We're all very excited about seeing the next version of Martis. The question is a bit like how publicly we want to discuss some of the examples. But there's one that I'd like to share, which is our work with the Asian Federation Against Involuntary Disappearances, AFAD, and it's an interesting case because some of these groups have been documenting for decades. So there's been part of AFAD that's been documenting almost 2,000 cases over the last 20 years, whereas some of their partners in other countries in Southeast Asia haven't been that far. And the experience they had with documentation is that they were able to push for a law against forced disappearances in the Philippines in 2012, which kind of the catalyzer for them to, okay, now let's take this to the regional level, let's do documentation on the regional level and try to push for more of that, for ratifications and actual implementation of the UN Convention Against Enforced Disappearances. So they turned to us and we designed the process with them. And how they're using OpenMSys in that case is that they're actually sharing a lot of the information, and it's a way for not only learning more what's been going on in other countries for every individual partner, but also how other people have been going about documentation. So the less experienced groups learn quite a bit about methodology from the more experienced ones, and that's an interesting part of collaboration. There is just seeing what others are doing can you help gather and develop new ideas. Of course, there are challenges because if you're less experienced, then you might be more willing to go for a, say, less sophisticated system just because that's what works for you, and you're not very willing to compromise on the complexity of a very thoughtful system if you've been doing this for 20 years. So I think bringing groups together, there's always this human factor of different, almost philosophical approaches to what kind of data needs to be preserved, which is not only in the area of documentation, but also in other areas. A tremendous challenge is when bringing different groups together, many of them who have already been doing something for a while. With Casebox, we haven't had much documentation experience. There's only one so far. It's been more used for litigation. And what's interesting there is that if you're preparing documents for litigation, you have very often many revisions. And a very simple problem to solve was version history of revisions. So very often you would have long file names: first draft, second draft, final draft, very final draft, the draft we think we have submitted, the draft we have actually submitted. So one of the key features for Casebox was making this process easier, which was designed in the context of litigation, but to some extent that's obviously also very valuable for documentation.
I can imagine that kind of revision history would be useful for other human rights groups as well, for reports and things. Dimitri, do you want to talk about your tools and how they're being used for collaborative documentation and information sharing?
Yes. Well, by preface, they're not being used for collaborative documentation sharing. I mean, what's happening is that perhaps within a particular organization, there will be several different people who would collaborate on these cases. However, all of our clients so far have come to us with strict requirements for security and who lead their own investigations and their own campaigns. So what we have done really is not enabled our systems for kind of cross-border public information collation. But what is present in our systems are very defined permission management systems, allowing an organization to be divided into several different groups. The individual groups would have access only to their own information, perhaps with some managerial oversight, which is afforded to only one or two key people. There's always this balance, I guess, with privacy, confidentiality, and then, of course, collaborative sharing of data. So our tools to date, have not been, as popularized as those, created by Huridox and by Benetech, because this isn't really our raison d'etre. We are more into the tool development side of things instead of the documentation. So to my knowledge, and all of these tools are open source and can be downloaded and used by anybody else, but to my knowledge, they have been used by closed networks of investigators. Obviously, the results of these investigations, the analyses that these tools can create, is then published. I'm not sure if I answered the question right. I can expand if I missed out.
But I guess I'm thinking that if there are networks of people who are using your tools, inherently there are multiple people collaborating on the documentation of something. Like, I wonder if, and I'd be curious to hear how rights case works too in this, in that, like, could you have people in different countries or people in different organizations or even people within the same organization collaborate on documenting a particular incident or something along those lines?
In Mali case of documenting human rights violations, the project was introduced just after realizing there were many violations committed by the people who were on power after the putsch, after the coup d'etat. So there were many atrocities, but also in the north, west to Kidal, Kulikolo, there were also rebels who executed people. So when I was training them, first they had an idea how they would really document information, and from their respective regions in the rural area, not the capital, and convey the information to the capital. So that's why Freedom House thought of using Matters to share that information. We have not had the outcome yet, but I think it is a case worth researching after the project or when they have started documenting. They have started, yes, in the regional offices, but I am not really aware whether they have really started analyzing. But still, when you are in a particular region, you can just document information, and the headquarters of the Malian Human Rights Defenders Network can get that information without the documentarian traveling to the capital, because it's risky. And also having a laptop or having anything, sometimes there may be like roadblocks where probably the government soldiers or any other interested in your work can arrest you and take away the laptop and everything. So with the Matters, it is easier once you have entered the case into Matters. It is automatically sent to the server, and the headquarters could retrieve the information. The case that we had, I think in Kidal, they didn't have electricity because the war was going on of the rebellion and the government, and also the documenters were not having laptops. So they decided to use the paper. Then there is an arrangement of how they will send the information, the document to the capital city, and the capital city people will feed the information into Matters.
Okay, interesting. Thanks for sharing that. Carolina, did you have something that you wanted to add?
Yes, thinking in this stuff about the city and the rural and urban space, and thinking about the documents, what says about the national police in those 6 years, how they share his own information. And it's interesting because I don't know, probably they still using that, but they use communications, and they use, I think they still use Telegram. And I don't have the right answer, but I want to share the recently experience doing observation during the elections in 2003, and he has different organization to do that, and one of them is using cell phone by they share sensitive information. Probably it's not the best way, but like they say, not everyone have internet here, not everyone has light or electricity or the possibility to go and connect things. And during the elections, you want to have the whole information quickly, right? So they call every minute, and somebody here in the capital creates a database to insert all information they receive, but they receive by codes. That is the way they protect his information. So he needs to train a lot of people for everyone use the same vocabulary, control vocabulary, for it's not too easy to know what is you are sharing with, and that is the two experience I want to share, because the national police use codes too, right? And they change the codes every, I think, something like every week or every month, something like that. And that document, like the Telegram, goes for any people, different people, civil people, to share, to bring the original document to the capital.
Yeah.
But they don't understand so easy what is the content. But I want to put that on the table. I don't know if it's the best way, but it's how it's working in Guatemala.
No, that's a really interesting addition to this conversation. It's not just about using tools for encryption and digital security. I mean, this is a form of encryption offline, using codes to hide the information and protect it. That's really a good point. I think we should probably go ahead and wrap it up here. It's already been almost an hour, and Dimitri, I know that there's like a question just kind of hanging out there for you, but maybe you could explain further in the online forum about how your tools allow for multiple people to document information about a particular case or event.
Yeah,
any other?
I will get to that. Sorry, my computer has been off and off this morning.
No problem. Oh, Janvier has maybe one last thing that he wants to add, and then we can wrap up.
Yeah, the question I wanted to ask Carolina Lopez is, using the phone is not safe, especially when you have a lowly allowing phone tapping and interception of messages. So that would be really risky for human rights defenders if the case they are working on, in the words of the politicians, of the national interest. That would be really risky.
Yes, I am positive with you. And what kind of alternatives they have?
Yeah.
Of course, yeah, when there is no any alternative, they resort to the easiest path, of course, which is not really secure. That's why I think it would be good that I think if we have enough time, we would really discuss more, but the time is our arch enemy. I think if I have something to say, I will just try to post it on the net. Thank you.
Yeah, I think it'd be great to talk about mobile phones and the risks and the opportunities that they pose for human rights documentation. So let's take that into the discussion, definitely. Like Carolina said, they didn't really have any other options. Okay. Thank you, everybody. This has been super informative, and everything is recorded, so I'll post it in the discussion once it's available to me, and we will continue the discussion in the New Tactics Forum today. So I'll see you in there. Thank you so much.
Hi.
Bye, everyone.
Thanks. Bye-bye.